All right. Well, it looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started right here at the top of the hour and make the most of this time that we have together. I'm sure there'll be plenty more people trickling in. But on behalf of Inbenta, we're super excited to have a special guest, two special guests today, our CEO, Melissa Solis, and one of our strategic advisors here at Inbenta, Bobby Mehta, who I'll allow him to introduce himself, but a very experienced CEO in the enterprise space. And that's why today we're going to be discussing how to drive enterprise transformation with AI. And we've titled this Lessons from the Past and Strategies for the Future, because it's rare. It's a rare opportunity to have someone joining us with so much experience as an executive in the enterprise space, as an operator who understands transformation, and he's going to speak to that. But there's so many lessons that we can learn from the past that can be applied to this space. And Bobby not only, again, has all this experience, but really understands this digital age, this exponential age that we're moving into, and how that's going to apply to businesses and the enterprise. So why don't we just do a short little introduction, maybe 30 seconds from each one of you, so our audience can get acquainted with you, and then we'll dive right into the subject matter for today.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Adam. So I'm Melissa Solis. I am the CEO of Inbenta. I actually am very excited to be here today and talk about this topic. Prior to becoming the CEO of Inbenta, I was the CEO and co-founder of a company called Gaiac Systems, and we were in the fraud and risk business. We had it for 16 years. My brother and I started it with $300 and sold it for $610 million to the London Stock Exchange. And I had the privilege of working with Bobby Mehta as one of a board advisor with Gaiac. So we're very excited to have him here today, and also to have him advising on our Inbenta board.
Melissa, thank you so much for that. And Adam, thank you so much for that tremendous introduction. I very much hope I can live up to it. In terms of my background as the previous CEO, and then since then have been working and investing and mentoring early stage companies, as well as serving on a number of public boards. And one of the highlights of the last decade for me has been Melissa partnering with you and seeing the tremendous journey that you and your brother took us through with Gaiac, and very happy to be part of the Inbenta journey as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bobby. And just a few housekeeping items, everyone. We will be doing some Q&A at the end. We're here to answer your questions. We want to know where you are. And again, we have so much experience in the room. Take advantage of this opportunity to be able to ask questions to Melissa and Bobby, and we'll make sure we get to as many as possible before the top of the hour. But you don't have to wait until the end. You can drop them in, and then we have a team in the chat and the Q&A who'll be taking care of those. And so just to kind of, we're going to be discussing today. First, we're going to hit on kind of where are we in the space, 10,000 foot view, where are we? And then we're going to be talking about how to, what are some pitfalls or opportunities to accelerate the adoption of AI. And then we're going to get into some strategies, some really practical ways that organizations and enterprises have the opportunity to scale AI. There's a lot of blockers that we're seeing, again, a lot of pitfalls, so conversation to help navigate around that. And then finally, we're going to discuss how to leverage AI as a competitive advantage in your space. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Bobby, I'm going to kind of pitch this first one to you, but we really want to set the stage here and cut through some of the hype. There's a lot of noise out there in the space about the adoption of AI, what kind of what are the possibilities with AI agents, and where are we? And of course, every investor and every executive is mandating investments in AI in the space in 2025. So just 10,000 foot high level view, where are we right now with the state of AI in the enterprise?
So I'll start out by saying that we are probably coming to the end of what I would call the hype cycle and entering a phase where serious introspection, strategic thinking, and work is being done to figure out how to leverage what the potential of these amazing tools is at scale. Just a few statistics to give some context to that. AI and Gen AI is now a top priority for most executives, with 75% recognizing or enumerating them as the top 3 priorities. I certainly see that on every one of the boards that I serve on. Investments, most large enterprises are investing anywhere from, at the low end, 10 to 15 million to upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars to AI enable their enterprises. So a lot of work, a lot of thinking, a lot of effort, and a lot of resource going into it. Having said that, and I think many in the audience perhaps are experiencing this as we speak, that there is a gap. There's a gap between the promise and the impact. And that's really what we are here to talk about today. And just to put some statistics around that, only 26% of companies surveyed, and there have been many surveys, but here I'm quoting a Boston Consulting Group survey, have successfully scaled their AI initiative to realize tangible value. As a result, there's obviously 74% that have yet to realize tangible value. And obviously that's not due to want of effort, want of aspiration, but that's again what I think we're here to talk about is what are those barriers? How do you identify opportunities to create value, and how do you get on the sustainable trajectory to do that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, for a lot of what we're seeing as we're out talking to people, and having conversation not only with our customers but also potential customers, is I think that at first everyone was first of all excited, unsure, a little bit of scared, right, because they were unsure how it was going to impact the corporation and also their employees. And then, because of the pressure of the marketplace, a lot of them jumped in without really thinking through the process, which is why you see so many deployments failing right now. And now that everybody's kind of calmed down and you're seeing actual budgets to implement AI within the organizations, now the real conversations are taking place. Like, where is our data, right? Is it in PDFs? Is it in databases? Is it in websites? How do we bring it together? Are there duplicates? Is it accurate? There's all these questions that are rolling around that have to be addressed. And then do we buy, do we build, right? How do we pull that talent in? Just because you have a developer in-house doesn't mean that they're an expert and that they can do AI. And so there's a lot of challenges now that are facing businesses. How do you, if you decide to go ahead and buy versus build or do a combination of that, like how do you pick a vendor? What are the things you need to look at, right? And I think there's a lot of decisions, and it's very different for large corporations versus small companies. Is how do you make those decisions? And I think now you're having the good conversations and people are really digging in and trying to understand, because they realize by deploying things without really thinking it through and having the right solution just causes friction for their customers or employees, and it really hurts their brand.
Just building on that, Melissa, I would say, all of this sort of excitement, but also confusion and also apprehension is exacerbated really by the fact that, 3 years ago we were talking about Gen AI, right, and LLMs, and as people were getting comfortable with what that meant from a data security, cybersecurity, and governance perspective, which is rightly where a lot of large corporations put some of their initial thoughts and efforts so they could govern these new tools appropriately. You now have the beginning of another hype cycle with agentic AI, right? So just as people are getting comfortable with one set of tools, you have now this onslaught or tsunami of another set of tools. which creates its own sets of issues and concerns. And so it's not surprising in many ways that we are where we are. But the good news is, I think there are lessons we can learn from how these types of tools have been absorbed, have been deployed at scale, and have created incredible value.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's double click a little bit there because I think it's interesting, Bobby, what you're saying. So, this is clearly moving beyond a CIO level conversation or a department level conversation, and more of a strategic CEO. Strong leadership is necessary to navigate the level of change that's happening right now. And so, with all of the whiplash and all of the hype and the seemingly different terminology and release of innovation that's happening, the cadence is just so frequent. How, as a CEO, or an executive in a company, do you navigate that and really kind of hone in and define clear objectives and priorities when it comes to this, so that can filter down into your team and without causing craze and hype and confusion?
So I think I would just start out by saying first, Adam, that AI itself is not new. Those of you who are in financial services and perhaps in many other industries, will know that probably the first neural net system that was deployed was Fraud Falcon, that many of us in the credit card business have used for over 40 years, right? So AI itself is not new. However, obviously, as we all know, what is new is the enormous capabilities and ability of LLMs to assimilate and summarize vast amounts of structured and unstructured data. So the realm of the possible, of the art of the possible, moves from structured to unstructured data, to images, to voice, so many more modalities. So that's new. Second, the other thing that's new is with LLMs, it's been the democratization of people who are not necessarily technical to be able to access and harness the power of this information. So those are, at least from my mind, two new aspects of the technologies that we now have at our disposal, and where the challenge is how do you grow it, how do you get value from it. And I think these characteristics, in my opinion, have the potential to create enormous improvements in productivity, in effectiveness, in quality, and in the quality of customer and consumer interactions. Having said that, I think there's something, what's new is old and what's old is new, at least from where I sit. And Gen AI and agentic AI tools are not, frankly, conceptually different from a lot of the business process re-engineering tools and techniques and frameworks, that we use as businesses and enterprises back in the 90s. And I think there's some really key lessons to be learned from what tools were used, what techniques were used, what frameworks were used to identify opportunities to scale and to build strategic value. Let me pause there, Melissa, and see if you want to add something at this point. And then I want to go on and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing in terms of where people are putting their efforts and what are some best practices.
I think the most important thing that I think is really important as a leader, even within Inbenta, like how do we look at bringing AI in, generative AI, and use it effectively? I like to say there's always going to be hype, there's always going to be excitement, but the one thing you have to really be careful on is getting caught up in that hype and then making decisions not based off of the good business principles that you've used to build the company and sustain it, and that you should do business with. So for example, when agentic agents first came out and everybody was going crazy and saying, oh, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it. And so I think, just to put it in layman's term, is especially in highly regulated industries, which we work a lot with here at Inbenta, I like to liken it to if you would give your 12-year-old the keys to your car and the debit card to your bank account and say, go out there, here's the keys to the kingdom, right? You can, here's the keys to the car, here's the debit card to the bank account, and be responsible. Well, we all know that they might be responsible for a little bit, but when they have some friends come over, they're going to get off the rails, they're going to spend too much money, and they're probably going to try to drive the car. So that is how I like an agentic agents, right? They're awesome. They do amazing things. But if you don't have guardrails and you can't keep them within the lines, it can lead to problems, which is why you have hallucinations, which is why a lot of highly regulated businesses are saying, time out. Whoa, we can't do that. We want to use them. But, if it means that we're going to get in trouble with regulators or we're going to give wrong information, you hear the story about the car dealership a while back who actually gave out the wrong price, and now they have someone coming in to buy the car and it's not correct. So there's always those fears that take place. That's why here at Inbenta, when everything was first happening with Gen AI, we said time out. We have to step back and look at the process and make sure that whatever we do and whatever we deliver to our customers, that we're giving them the guardrails so they can make sure that when they're delivering it to their customers, one is they don't have to worry about hallucinations or giving wrong information. And they can also be able to look at a regulator or someone, an auditor, and say, this is where the information came from, and have full transparency. And I think that's the important factor that everyone's got to keep in front of them. AI is amazing. It's been around for years. Generative AI is amazing. And agentic agents, it's incredible what can happen if you utilize them correctly. But when they don't have the proper guide rails and you don't have the proper transparency, what happens is it can really cause issues. And not only from a business perspective, from a regulatory perspective. And I think that's why, as we make decisions as leaders, I'm always looking at the whole picture. It's like, yes, maybe it will help me get there quicker, but what are the consequences if I'm not making good, solid decisions around that? Do I have the right compliance and governance? So I tell everyone, this is a process that you need to make sure that you're walking through the same steps that you would normally do in making good business decisions. You cannot get caught up in the hype, because if you do, you can make decisions that will have long consequences that you'll have to fix over years.
So just building on that, Melissa, I can't overemphasize the importance of having a good compliance framework, a good security framework for both data and cybersecurity, a good framework for understanding whether the models are performing as expected, whether you have disparate impact. It's not just regulation, which you rightly point out is clearly important, but also reputation, right?
Yes.
Because in this world of social media, if an agentic system goes off the rails and does something inappropriate, there's a regulatory issue, but there's also a reputational issue.
Yes.
So large enterprises, or all enterprises in particular, need to make sure that those prerequisites or foundational requirements are in place, or at least far enough along that you have a way of governing, tracking, and identifying what these AI systems are doing. Having said that, what at least I'm seeing is large companies are, at least this is my classification, so not everyone will perhaps classify it this way, but I find it useful to classify what companies are doing. Step one, what they're doing is trying to basically creating whatever version of LLMs that they want, but deploying it within their firewalls and making it accessible to their employees. The purpose of that is to get people comfortable with doing it, to provide an outlet for the technologically advanced members of the workforce who are going to experiment with it anyway. So if the company doesn't provide them with an outlet to do it, they might go off the reservation, as it were. So the first thing that a lot of companies are doing is to secure the LLMs. That goes back to the points that Melissa just made, by making it available to employees. Second, the second category, I think, is a set of no regrets types of moves that companies are making, and the applications that fit into what I'm calling the no regrets bucket will expand over time. The two that I see as most prevalent are coding assistants, and people are understanding getting between 10 to 30% improvements in coding productivity, quality, etc. And the second is in the realm of contact centers, and Melissa Inbenta is obviously a core player in that arena. One of the characteristics of many of these no regrets moves are going to be, that they will tend, my hypothesis is over time, they will tend to be vended solutions, because these are solutions that no one enterprise will have the capability to have the broad experience of deploying it in different environments, different industries, and so on. And so vended solutions and vendor providers or vendor partners are more likely in that no regrets bucket to have the ability to say, well, here are the pitfalls. Here's best practices for deployment. Here are best practices for change management. Here are best practices to minimize hallucinations and minimize regulatory and compliance and other concerns. The third bucket is where I think massive value will get created, which is identifying key processes within the company that are idiosyncratic to the enterprise, that are core to how one either manages expenses or manages customer interactions. And that's where the real scale opportunity and the opportunity to create competitive advantage comes from. That's the third bucket. And the fourth bucket, and I see a lot of activity in the first two buckets, the beginnings of activity in the third bucket, which is to reinvent processes, to reimagine the work that's being done and how that work is being done, much like occurred, as I said, in the 90s around business process reengineering, and probably over the last 10 or 15 years using robotic process automation. But agentic AI and LLMs are just so much better at accomplishing those tasks. And appropriately. And the fourth bucket, which I see very little activity today, is how you can reinvent or disrupt your business using agentic AI and totally change the business model. So those are the four buckets I'm seeing. One other point I just want to make, and then I'll give it to you, onto you, Melissa, that leading companies also are focusing on not just the technology and the AI, right? They are focused on allocating their resources into what I call a 70-20-10 principle. It's a good rule of thumb. 70% to people and processes, change management, key critical processes to a company where there's a lot of cost embedded, where there's a lot of value to be unlocked. 20% to technology, and 10% to the algorithms. The algorithms are the commodity. And within technology, I would be remiss if I didn't also add that people are putting increasing focus on their data. And so we can come back and talk about all of these more, but why don't I pause and ask Melissa to comment as well?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Bobby. And I think, really just diving into what you're covering right there, what are the keys for success? Like, how do you have a successful deployment, right? Why are so many deployments failing right now? And I think, it's based off of a lot of different reasons. One is, people will go out and pick a vendor or decide to build it internally, and their data is not what we call AI ready. And if your data is not AI ready, you're not going to have success, right? When you're building these solutions, because if the information's wrong, then the answer is going to be wrong. And I think there's a myth because people use ChatGPT and they feel like, oh, it's going to work like ChatGPT. It doesn't work that way. Now, as solutions become more advanced, searches can become like a ChatGPT experience. But if you don't have the right information and the data is not ready where it can be accessible and it's accurate and it's intelligent, you're going to struggle to have success. And then again, we've talked about governance and compliance, avoiding vendor lock, having the guardrails around agentic AI, as well as the culture shift. Do you buy versus build, and how do you find talent? That's a huge question. And we kind of joke about it, but every developer says, oh yeah, I do AI. Well, what does that mean? Right? Yeah, you already do AI because it's been around for years, but are you able to do the functionality that is required to have a successful deployment around generative AI, right? Can you fine tune? Are you able to make the changes and set it up and know what to do? And not everyone can make that transition. So having the right talent, and as more and more people are deploying solutions, it's harder to find talent, right? So those are the challenges that most companies are really facing.
Just building, Adam, sorry, did you want to chime in?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what Melissa just said, which is, I think it's equally important based approach to AI deployment. There's certain processes that need a much higher fidelity of data and outcome than others. If you're doing research and there's a human in the loop, the risk of deployment is lower than if, just take your example of the auto dealership and price disclosure to a consumer, that has to have probably 4 nines of accuracy. So again, it's another good rule of thumb to say, well, what is taking a risk-based approach and really being clear about what the fidelity of the outcome needs to be, and therefore tuning your processes and tuning the technology and tuning the data so it's fit for purpose for what that process is expected to deliver. And that's a very important aspect, because then you can then feed that into your compliance frameworks, your regulatory frameworks, et cetera, to say, where can you move maybe more quickly, or where can you do test and learn, versus where you really have to make sure that the processes and the AI models, et cetera, are giving you the output that you require. So the technology and the automation has to be fit for purpose for the processes that you're trying to automate and enable.
So as we talk about scaling AI for success in an organization, obviously we've talked about the challenges that are faced, but it really comes down to or one of the main issues that we also see inside of enterprises is the lack of adoption by the workforce and the actual individual users. And something we talk about a lot is that the accuracy level has to be there. So the tech is important, right? Because the accuracy level and the success of the technology determines how much it's trusted. And that determines how much it gets adopted inside of the organization. And if you don't have that adoption, then it's really hard to drive the business outcomes upstream, right? Drive value throughout the organization and to the bottom line. And we see that a major priority for organizations right now is kind of driving efficiency, and as a knock-on effect, lowering cost, right? So maybe we can hit on a couple things there. How do you drive, or what are some best practices for driving adoption inside the organization? And then as that impact does move upstream, making sure that it's aligned with business outcomes.
No, I think that's good. I think that there's a couple of things that sometimes no one wants to talk about. It's easy, right? Once I get comfortable with knowing we've put the proper things in place to make sure that we have the appropriate governance and compliance, and our data is ready, and we have budget for it. We've obviously determined whether we're going to build or buy. But then let's talk about driving adoption within our organization. So a lot of times for the C level or even the next level down, it's easy for us to get on board, right? Because we see what it can do for us. We see the advantages. We see how it's going to let us grow. It's going to let us, service our customers better. The problem is if you don't have good, strong messaging and you don't have a plan to really carry that messaging down, what happens is people downstream gets fearful because of loss of friends, jobs, positions. And you can have people that are actually doing the integration, the implementation, block it and slow things down and really have a negative response, which drives you not to continue to maybe to move forward with that project if you've not taken the proper time to really talk about the messaging and how it's going to move your company ahead. I like to explain it to my team is that it's not about replacing individuals. It's allowing AI to do tasks that we should not be doing in the first place, that really we should be focusing on more important tasks that needs humans involved to drive it forward, to grow as a company. And so I think it's not just important to have the budget and make sure your compliance and the legal team is doing the governance and the compliance and the data team is ready and all that. It's about driving that message down to every person within your organization, because it's important that they understand, like, what is it going to bring? What is the success it brings? How is it going to help us to grow as a company and be more productive and provide service better for our customers and also service our internal customers, which is our employees.
Totally agree, Melissa. I mean, these challenges and ways to overcome these challenges from the deployment of AI are really no different from the challenges that were faced when enterprises did large-scale business re-engineering, 40 years ago. They were no different from when there was a big initial move to offshoring various functions and activities, and so and it's always interesting to me that we have to relearn these lessons every time, as opposed to saying, no, wait, we have these playbooks, we have done these things before.
Yes.
And we just need to pick up those playbooks and adapt them to the current situation. No doubt that there will be aspects that are different, but the fundamental principles of getting your workforce ready, of messaging why this is a good thing for the enterprise, making that message credible by providing resources for upskilling employees. All of these things businesses have been doing and have done as new techniques, new technologies have emerged and gotten embedded in the way businesses are run. And I would just add that message, at least from my experience, is much more credible if you're an early starter. If you do it, if you're at the front end of the wave that enables these new technologies, because you're then in a position to gain market share and to accelerate your organic growth. If you're doing it reactively as an enterprise, that's when you're more likely than not to have layoffs. But if you're doing it proactively, you're able to grow into it and you minimize some of the negative aspects that the adoption of these new productivity technologies will inevitably bring. So we need to be honest with ourselves on that. But you're much better situated as a leader to do it at the front end of the wave than be reactive.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful point. And when it comes to creating competitive advantage, I want us to kind of get our minds around, where this is going and why it really matters right now. I think there's, we've discussed this, and I think there's some leaders who are kind of sitting on the fence. Some kind of want to wait and see what happens in the space, see how the technology matures, see what vendors are actually going to be around in the next 2 to 3 years, right? Who's going to kind of become the national champions or the major players in the space. And then you have the early adopters, right, who are obviously experiencing challenges of, of being early adopters, right, which is normal, right? So as a leader, you have to kind of find that balance, because if you don't um, adapt quickly, this is technology is compounding, and as this is a technology that the curve of innovation is so steep that if you're not keeping up with it, you're going to fall further and further behind the more you kind of lag behind. So in terms of creating a competitive advantage, I'd love to see or hear, Bobby and Melissa, when you picture like a truly lean AI first enterprise in the next 3 to 5 years, what does that look like? And as a leader, how should we be thinking about leadership, culture, um, execution, and things like that, as we're looking 3 to 5 years down the road, and where this is going, and how to create a competitive advantage in our space?
Right. I think there are lessons to be learned from how large enterprises develop software. I'm old enough to remember, enterprises that built custom general ledger systems, right, before the world of packaged software. Then you had the advent of packaged software, and if you look at application development today, large enterprises are really taking components and knitting them together, right? The proportion of application software platforms that are vended versus developed bespoke, has shifted dramatically, right? So what are the underlying principles of that? I think the underlying principles of that are that if something is not going to be unique to your company, there are probably better providers, partners out there. You can adapt it to your use case, you can adapt it to your culture, you can adapt it to your processes, and most importantly, adapt it and make it fit for purpose for your data. But, so really being thoughtful about build versus buy, I think is a very important first step as one traverses, if you like, this path. True competitive advantage in the deployment of or becoming an AI-led or AI-first organization is going to go back to saying, what are your unique processes? It's not going to be the AI. It's going to be the imagination of the leadership team and the management team to reimagine how work will get done. What can be done that's automated? What can be done where human judgment is required? How do you maximize the value of your data asset? I always say the data asset of most large enterprises is probably the biggest asset that's not on the balance sheet, and one that everybody constantly underestimates the value of. So it's really being thoughtful and strategic about what is unique about this company and how can AI enable and amplify and accelerate that uniqueness, either from a cost and productivity perspective or from how one interacts with their customers. All other applications of AI can be and should be, in my mind, be purchased, because those are table stakes. If you don't have them, you're not competitive. And I will tell you, if you try and build them bespoke, you will probably make mistakes that an experienced vendor has made in the past and has the foresight to be able to avoid.
Right. Absolutely. And I like to tell my team all the time, you can't be the best at everything. So there's times when you have leaders in that space, it just makes sense to go out and partner with them And then there's times where you need to really build it yourself, right? To get it like you want it and be able to customize it. And so I think when you look at the companies who are really doing quite well in this AI journey, it's the ones who have a mixture of buy and build. Because again, you can't not be the best at everything that you do. And so knowing what you're good at and then partnering with companies that, you know, specialize in that or the leaders in that space is a great way, a great strategy for many companies that are quite successful in their AI journey.
Mhm.
Another aspect that we probably haven't touched on as much is data, right? Most companies have made decent progress on, creating their own data lakes, or now they're called lake houses, I guess, around structured data, right? Data which can be expressed in rows and columns. There's a whole sea of information that has incredible semantic value, a lot of signal that without LLMs was just not economical, right? It's
Yes.
the unstructured data in documents and PDFs that Melissa mentioned earlier, in terms of chat-based information, in terms of emails from a customer contact standpoint. That can now be much more readily accessible. There's also, data from, production data, web interactions, and so on, that can now be accessed in a cost-effective way. So really taking a more expansive view of what the data asset is and where the data value is actually very important,
Right.
to be able to get the full value of what the new tools can provide. And there too, I think there might be ways working with partners to get a glimpse of the value of that data. So let's take contact centers, for example. With a vended solution, if the vendor has experience with working with those unstructured data sets, it's a narrow but important vector by which a company can learn about the value of unstructured data, which can then be expanded in a more enterprise-wide fashion. But I think this whole question of really expanding one's view, or taking the blinkers off, what data has value and how that value can be leveraged, will be another important aspect of what an AI-driven, forward-leaning enterprise will and should look like.
No, absolutely. I think jumping in there was actually a question asked, Adam, from one of the people attending the webinar, which I think it leads right into this exact topic. And they said, you mentioned majority of the mistakes have been just blindly jumping in. Do you think there's a way to look backwards, or it's back to square one? I think that's an incredible question. And I want to make sure, I know we're getting to the end of time, that we answer that, because we hear it a lot. I get a lot of questions like that, especially at trade shows or when I'm out meeting with customers. I'm going to give you a real life example. We had a large corporation here in the U.S. that came, they're actually international, but we were talking to their leadership here in the U.S. and they came to us because they had went out, spent a lot of money trying to get their data ready and roll out a solution to their customers. And the truth is they were never able to deploy it because they were not able to get their data in a structured, accessible format so they could actually be able to query it and answer questions and answer them accurately. Again, going back to that accuracy, it's so important for regulated companies. And so a lot of vendors would have said, you got to start over, right? And they would have charged them hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars more to be able to provide a solution. And one of the things that we did is stepped in and said, hey, you know what? Let us meet you where you're at. There's no need to go back and just redo everything. Let's talk about what you're trying to accomplish. Just look at where the challenges are. We'll fix that, and then let us move forward with you. And that's why it's so important, number one, to have that data. It has to be accessible, or whatever you're trying to deploy is not going to work. It has to be accurate. It has to be in a structured format. But also it's important to know that you have a vendor that is what we call vendor lock. if you have to do business with that company in order to roll out a solution and you're not able to fire them and pick up what you paid for and move it to another vendor, you need to talk to someone else, because it's important if your vendor is not able to meet your needs, because as things change, and I like to say I go to bed and it's one way and I wake up and it's another, because we're constantly having new things that are released, new versions of the LLMs. I mean, it's amazing what is happening, but if you don't have a vendor that's continuing to grow and evolve and is able to provide and keep you up to date with what's happening in the industry, keeping you informed, they're not a trusted advisor, then you need to be able to pick up the work that you've already done and move it to a vendor who can meet your needs. And so it's really important as you evaluate people, regardless, you should always find out, are you going to be locked in? And if something doesn't work, are you going to have to scrap everything and start over? So thank you for sharing that question. That was an amazing question.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to encourage those of you who have not, asked a question in the chat. Now is the perfect time to go ahead and do that, and we will get to make sure we get to all to the to every question that comes in. We did have some questions come in before the event via email, so we wanted to hit on those. We'll start with those and make sure to go ahead and get your questions in now. So the first one that I want to ask to both of you is just a kind of a quick practical one, but if you had to pick one AI investment to prioritize in 2025, what would it be?
I'll give you two. One
Okay.
is contact centers and the other is for coding co-pilots.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, coding co-pilots. And then it'd be hard to pick another one, because we are using AI within our organization and partnered with multiple great vendors that have really moved us forward as a company. So, but I'm with Bobby on the one on the coding.
Yeah.
It's an amazing
Melissa,
tool.
Yeah. Other one I would add is contact center, using
Yep.
AI in contact centers, whether
Yep.
they be internal or vis-a-vis the customer.
External, right?
External.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two no regrets, as I said earlier.
Absolutely.
No regrets moves. Those are the two that I'm seeing deployed most prevalently.
Mm-hmm. No,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah, I'd kind of building on what you said, Bobby, in terms of contact centers and different use cases there, something that we're seeing a lot, and Melissa, I'd like to hear maybe you speak to this, is we're seeing a lot of demand in the space for voice right now. As consumer behaviors change, right, they're wanting to interact with these voice bots that, they can, making not just a traditional chat bot, right, as we've thought about it for the last 10 years, but omni-channel, accessible, use cases and ways to interact with this data and the AI. We're seeing a lot of that now, and a lot of companies adopting that.
No, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is people want a conversational that is native. In other words, they don't want a British voice speaking in Spanish delivering a solution in Spain, right? And they want to feel like that it's, and listen, you guys can laugh on that one, but it's happened. So the point is, they want to feel like that when they talk to that person and interact, that one, it's someone that understands a dialect, they're speaking in the right accent, and they want to feel like it's a human experience. We all want to feel like we're being paid attention to and someone's listening, and we can interact them in a conversational way. The other thing is making sure that when you're actually doing the translation, it's really important that it's accurate and it's done in a way that people are able to understand, because obviously, if there's many forms of Spanish, we like to say there's Spain Spanish, there's Mexico Spanish, there's Tex-Mex Spanish, there's a lot of different versions of Spanish, right? And it's really important that wherever you're talking to that person in the different region, is that you're using the right slang, the right words. It's really important, because people want to feel like they're being talked to, not talked at. And then also the time, the response is making sure that the time that it takes from them speaking to actually getting a response, that there's not a big delay. That's also important. So it's really important to make sure you have the right vendor. That's one thing that we've spent a lot of time on here internally at Inbenta. We were founded in Spain, so language has been a huge focus of ours to make sure that we're doing the proper translation natively so that it's a good experience for the customer or for the employee.
Yeah, 100%. We have another question coming in. Hi all. What and how does Inbenta connect with the major players? Do you connect with database or do you connect with a customer database? So yeah, I guess how do we interact with other applications, and then how do we interact with databases?
So we are integrated with many different core systems and databases, but we look at each customer. I like to say that each customer is unique and according to the systems that they use, but we can connect whether we already have a connection through our app hub, or if we need to do a customized connection, we can do that. That's one thing about Inbenta. We have the flexibility and agility to really meet you where you're at. So what I would tell you, if there's a particular integration that you're looking for, please reach out to our team and let them know. But one of the things we're focused on is really growing our integrations. And as we move into later this year, next year, we'll have over 1,000 integrations that you'll be able to quickly be able to integrate. So we're super excited about Merlin, our CTO, and the team that's driving that, because that's really important. Is regardless within your organization, I like to say you should not have to change your process to do business with us. We should meet you exactly where you're at. And that's becoming a huge focus for here at Inbenta, because we want to meet you right where you're at and not change your flow, but enhance it and give you a better experience for your customers or for your employees.
Excellent. Excellent answer. Okay, we have one more question coming in now. Any thoughts on overall knowledge governance and any tips for best practices? And that one goes right in line with another one we had come in around how do companies govern Gen AI output, particularly in regulated industries?
Yeah, let me maybe start out, and then Melissa, I'll ask you to add to that.
Yes.
So I think that's an evolving field, number one. Number two, there are third-party providers who have software agents, that can monitor models. So you have to have, depending on the complexity of the enterprise, I'm sure most enterprises have some form of model governance process. And so one has to step back and say, okay, how do you adapt and build model management processes for AI models and agentic models? And the third-party vendor solutions, basically, it'll be at some point agents monitoring agents. It'll be models monitoring models, because the pace at which the models are generating output, will outpace the ability to do a periodic review. You'll probably need to do a periodic review anyway, but the reality is going to be that if you want to protect against model drift, you want to protect against the kinds of hallucinations that Melissa talked about, maybe disparate impact, whatever aspect of model governance you want to do, that will have to be done in near real time or real time. And so the whole model governance process will need to be revamped depending on how many models you're creating, how many processes you're automating. And there are third parties, who are standing up processes that can enable and help companies to do that.
Absolutely. Just to piggyback off of that, Bobby, what I would say again, great answer. It starts with data accuracy, right?
Exactly.
It starts with having the data accurate, keeping it accurate, and being able to know, transparently show when an answer or response comes back, where is that coming from? Being able to show where it comes from. Them are critical parts of that. And I think the one thing I would really challenge companies, being especially in fraud and risk for many, many years, and compliance and governance was so important, working with banks and insurance companies and government agencies, is that it's really important not to think it's a one and done. This is going to continue to evolve as things change.
A continuous process, yeah.
Absolutely. I always say compliance and governance is an active, it's a verb. It doesn't just do one and done, right? It continues to move forward and evolve, and especially as new technology is rolled out and new capabilities with AI, it's going to be important that you continue to evaluate. It's a living, breathing document that continues to change as technology changes.
And Melissa, you can probably talk to this, but what I've seen for, let's just take customer contact applications, you can constrain the responses that the model provides. Right? You can,
absolutely.
So the model can only pick from a constrained set of responses, which doesn't eliminate errors, but can eliminate the most egregious errors. And so there are also ways in terms of model training and how you constrain the model. You can be more compliant out of the box. It doesn't obviate the need, as Melissa said, to do continuous monitoring, continuous compliance. But that's another risk mitigation technique that I've seen.
Absolutely. We call it the glass box. We say you can put whatever you want in the glass box. You can stuff it all in there. Anything you can fit in that box, put it in there. And then when it responds, that is built off of the information in that glass box. And what that does is put guardrails around your data to ensure that that information is being pulled from the information that you've put in that glass box.
Exactly.
So even if you don't have a particular response, it's going to build that response from that data, which, like Bobby said, really mitigates the chances of hallucination or wrong information being responded to. And I think that's really important, is as you look at a solution, like, are you able to control where those answers are being built off of? And that's really an important part.
Yep, critical. So we got one more question. I think we have time for just this last one, quick one. What do you see as the biggest game changer in voice bot technology for customer contact centers in 2026, 2026?
I'll tell you, for me, quite honestly, it's been clunky and it's not been a real good experience for most customers. And I'll be honest with you, I like to say I learn a couple new swear words every time I try to use a voice bot, especially some of the airlines ones, because you'll ask a question and it gives you an answer that has no relevancy to what you just asked. And so I think one of the things that we have really focused on is providing a solution that gives you great responses, so it has the same experience as a search or a chat functionality, right? And I think that is really important. And secondly, is having the premium voice, right, that really gives it the correct native accent, delivers it accurately, so it's the right form or dialect of that particular language, and having the responses where there's not some of the lags that you've seen in the past. I think all of those are very critical for more people to embrace voice bots. I think that's the key to success. And it's something that we've really spent time on here at Inbenta, because we know that it's really important to our customers. And just like with chats, sometime if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. Well, that doesn't work anymore. People are not accepting that. And so having a conversation like search or chat, that same thing has to happen with voice, because people are not going to use it if they're not able to get the answers that they're searching for.
Melissa, just a quick question for you. Are you seeing the emergence of technologies that, in addition to tailoring accents appropriately, are also able to detect when a situation is escalating?
Yeah, sentiment analysis, yes.
And so can you talk a little bit to that? Because that might also be responsive.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that we are able to do quite effectively is, since whenever someone's upset, If they're struggling to get the right answer, if they're getting frustrated, there's a lot of things that we can do, right? Our customer determines how they want to handle that, whether it's actually being sent to a live agent, whether it's transfer them over to a interactive experience, a text type chat or search that they can then are able to get the answer. They can drive that to a cell phone where they all of a sudden get a text saying, hey, would you like to be able to communicate? So there's all different kinds of solution, but being able to detect when someone is upset, if they're getting frustrated, if they're struggling to ask the right questions, understanding that and being able to drive to get help is critically important. And, like you talked about earlier in the conversation, Bobby, reputation is really important. And if customers get frustrated, they will go somewhere else, right? They'll go pick another vendor that can provide that service. They don't feel like they're able to get the answers they need. So it's critically important that not only do you have a particular bot or chat or search that works correctly, but also that we're able to detect when something's not going right and then giving them other alternatives to be able to get help.
Excellent. Well, thank you to you both. We're right at the top of the hour, but I'd like to kind of get a closing statement or a closing word from each of you, a quick summary of the insights that we've discussed today. So, Bobby, 30 seconds from you, and then maybe 30 seconds from Melissa, and then we'll end it out.
30 seconds are that this is a set of technologies that has tremendous potential, and I think we are right on the cusp of really being able to harness these technologies. And hopefully the audience got a flavor of at least our excitement and an optimism about this, but also some of the best practices with respect to how to execute.
Absolutely. I think these are extremely exciting days, and we are really excited about, how the functionality and the things that we're going to be able to do in the future. And we're just, not only are we excited about our current platform, but the things that, 6 months from now, or a year from now, we know that we're in like phase 1 of 15, and we're just in the beginning stages. And so I think, what I would say is buckle up, because it's going to be an exciting ride. And I think that, again, picking a partner, a vendor that is constantly looking out and keeping you ahead and on the cutting edge is going to be critically important, because we're going to continue to evolve and the functionality is going to continue to improve.
Yeah, well, thank you to you both, and thank you to our audience who hung around for this hour. I know this was really valuable. If you guys have any questions about AI, implementation, adoption, data, how to drive efficiency and how to drive for success in your AI projects that you're working on or have ambitions for this year, we'd love to hear from you. So please reach out. You can reach out to Melissa, you can reach out to myself or Bobby, Inbenta.com. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.